Hi everyone, welcome to episode 18 of Demand Decoded. Thanks for tuning in and taking the time to join us. So today I'm joined by Amanda, who's a regular guest on here anyway. She's commercial director at Blend, and we're going to discuss the very topical subject of 2024 strategy and planning. And we are really lucky to have Amanda on today to talk about this. You know, for the past 8 years, she's been at Blend working with B2B marketing leaders in different industries, mainly technology, to create effective long-term marketing strategies, and just has a wealth of experience in creating and fine-tuning those strategies for success. But instead of actually talking about how to create a strategy from scratch today, we want to cover how to really refine the strategy you're probably currently working on putting together. You know, looking at the mistakes we often see, areas you need to critique, how to set realistic and measurable goals, crafting a narrative to get buy-in, all those good things. Is anything else in there, Amanda, or does that pretty much cover it?
No, I think that covers everything. I think one thing that's really important to note is that this view of refinement works just as well for someone who is creating their first ever marketing strategy for a company that they're working with right now, as it does for someone who's been there 2 years, 5 years, 10 years even. Wherever you are in your process, this should actually help you make the best version of the strategy that you possibly can.
Absolutely. Cool. So we'll dive in. If you're watching live on LinkedIn, feel free to ask questions. If you drop them in the comments section in the LinkedIn live, we'll answer them as we go along. But yeah, let's dive in anyway. So I think a good place to start would be to actually try, if we can just discuss what marketers should be trying to do this year with this year's strategy compared to last year or the year before or year one, for example.
Yeah, I think for most marketers, the biggest challenge that they face is knowing what to include and what not to include. Some ideas are great ideas, but they don't fit in either to the strategy or to the time and budget that's available. So this year, I think most marketers would really benefit. And of course, the number of things that we can do as marketers is always expanding. There are new channels, new opportunities. How do you make sure that what you do has impact when you're taking those opportunities? So really, this is your moment to take a step back, to really evaluate the opportunities, the threats, the strengths and weaknesses of what you're doing already or what you're starting to do, and make the right choices and give yourself the right framework for next year.
Yeah, and would you say it's an ideal time to get creative, kind of push the boundaries a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people think this way, but I think the changing season, especially here where it's becoming autumn, it feels like a great time to have a think. It lines up really nicely with like the university academic year. It's a time for learning, and learning should inspire ideas. Definitely. I think you want to be creative with any strategy. The perfect strategy is blending what you find out from data and information with some creative input. And so, yes, now is the time to do some real blue sky thinking and make sure that the ideas that you've got are good ideas to go ahead with.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay. I think when we talk about refinement, and just the word refinement itself is often kind of related to mistakes. If you're refining something, you're trying to find, some errors or mistakes that might be made. So should we just throw around and discuss some of the most common mistakes that you've often found in marketing strategies and how people can go about avoiding them for next year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there are lots of different kinds of mistakes that people can make when putting marketing strategies together. The simplest and most damaging one is to try and include everything. Every possible idea, every possible persona, every possible, it's not to do any segmentation. It's not to do any targeting and really focus your efforts. So, That's a classic mistake I think a lot of people make. They start thinking about, I've got this many kinds of company I'm going after, and I've got this many personas, therefore I need that many campaigns, I need to multiply. And that can be one of the hardest things to come back from, because once you've committed to your business that you're going to do that many campaigns, actually, if you find that you don't have the time or the resource available to do them, you can really set yourself up for failure in the eyes of the people who, are your stakeholders. So that's not great. I think a lot of marketers who are established where they're working, this isn't so much for newer marketers in organizations, but if you're established there can be an assumption that what has worked for you in the past will continue to work, which is dangerous, especially when the world continues to change so rapidly when it comes to technology, use of content, and your buyers are, that your buyers aren't necessarily getting younger, but there are new people coming into the workforce of your, persona, and so you need to think about how they will be interpreting and consuming content too. That just kind of goes a bit further to just not really paying enough attention to what is changing, actually taking a step back and saying, is that keyword we've always relied on, is it changing? Does it mean to the market now what it did when we started talking about it 5 years ago? Or has what people find when they search for that term changed around us, and we no longer fit the bill? Is that why maybe we're not ranking anymore, for example? So when we look at the market, you've got to take an opportunity to really evaluate what's going on, what's happening. Some things will stay the same, and that's great, but you do need to know which things are staying the same as well as which things are changing. You don't want to keep doing the same things on the stuff that's actually moving its goalposts.
Yeah, don't just kind of copy and paste last year's strategy without doing that analysis of the market, the changing buyer preferences, buyer behavior, anything that's happening around you. I think it's definitely time for critical thinking. And actually, on that point, I think one of the most common mistakes, and something a lot of marketers try and do, is fit the strategy and kind of the analysis of last year and what we're going to do next year to fit their kind of memo and what they're trying to push. It's not necessarily an honest evaluation of what's happened. It's just, we kind of liked these things. They were kind of easy to do, or, it might be something along those lines. And perhaps manipulate a bit of data, manipulate some thinking into, these are working, these are the right things we should go ahead and do. Or it's something that, they just have a lot of personal investment in, that they don't kind of take a step back and really look at that honest picture.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's also really common for people to look at their direct competitors and go, well, if they're doing it, we need to be doing it. But you don't, from the outside, actually know if that's working for them. So, take the time to dive a little bit deeper and see if all of those subscribers to their new X feed, for example, actually represent people you would want to be buying from you. Don't just look at the surface of it. If you're looking at something that is external, dig as deep as you can to evaluate it as critically as possible. I think overall, one thing that really lets strategies down is a lack of honest critical evaluation. That take a step back from what we're doing and what we like doing, from what other people are doing, and really think, but is it working? Is this what's working? Is this what's effective?
Yeah, and that kind of goes hand in hand with, when you're looking at your strategy, you're looking at what's happening around you, jumping on the bandwagon, jumping on those next trends, the next tactic, the next channel. So often in marketing, it's the new shiny object that everybody wants a piece of the pie of. But if it doesn't fit with, your audience, your objective, your business goal, it's probably not right for you. And that's not to say that sometimes jumping on the bandwagon, it can be a good thing. Don't stand still, but there's a risk, isn't there?
There definitely is. I think we never want to stop we don't, we wouldn't want any marketers to stop moving with the times. That's kind of the opposite of what we want for them. But I think it's really important that you look critically at the new technology trends, whatever it is that you're moving into, and that you balance that with, well, if we're adding this, what needs to be reduced will come out, because ultimately there's only so much time and budget to go around. It's so easy to add without thinking about what you need to take away.
Yes. Okay. So on that point, kind of segueing into actually starting to, create your strategy now and really refine it, what steps should marketers be taking to make this year's strategy more successful than last year or the year before?
Well, I'd say I think anyone who is involved in marketing strategy is aware of the idea that the audit is a key part of it. I don't know that everyone takes the time to take the step of doing the internal audit as well as the external and market-facing audit, but both steps are really, really valuable. And even when you think the landscape hasn't changed, it's definitely important to check. So when you're thinking about that internal audit, it really is, it's two-sided. It's a question of what worked and what didn't work, absolutely. And that's in terms of the success it generated for you on the one side, but also take a look and a review on how those campaigns worked internally. How easy were they to deliver, or how difficult, how painful was it? And just make sure that when you are evaluating your different tactics and the things that you put out into the world, your campaigns, your big ideas, do a bit of a cost benefit analysis on them. If this thing was really hard to do and it didn't get us rewards, then that's a double reason for it not to come through. If this thing was quite hard to do but actually was fantastically successful, then our effort should be on making sure that it becomes easier to do. What can we change about the way that we work? And then, of course, if you've got things that are like, this was almost no effort and it was a ridiculous success, then those are the things that you want to do more of, because you'll fit 10 of them in for the time it takes you to do one of something else.
Yeah, it's that trade-off, isn't it, between the effort versus reward of something.
Yes, exactly. Like, ultimately, there are plenty of things that are hard but worth doing, and the effort that you do in this evaluation should be to essentially highlight how you can make them easier for you in the future. Because if you know that they're really, really worth it, even though they were hard, that's going to be worth working on. Whereas if you've got something you're like, I'm hit and miss on whether we should do this again. It had some success, but it wasn't great. If it was really painful to do and actually took twice as long as something that was much more successful, then it probably isn't worth the effort on trying to refine it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I suppose when you think about what's going on beyond your internal work in marketing and its immediate results, you need to think about the other sources for ideas, both within your business, your other stakeholders. If you're in marketing, you probably have a relationship with sales. You maybe have a relationship with other teams like customer success and so on. And think about, how do you make sure that you've got the right relationships to build on what you worked on together, but also taking that look at the market and seeing what your competitors are up to, or what technologies you see your personas and your ICPs interacting with. If you are, for example, if you're targeting really, really big budget work and you've got some really, really focused campaigns that you're going to end up doing for some key account-based marketing kind of leads, you might be going as far as reading their annual statements or checking out what they are talking about as an organization, to think about how your marketing strategies can tie into and build on things that you already know interest your potential customers.
Yeah.
And all of this is about, I suppose, that idea of prioritization. There's only going to be so much of you and your team and your budget to go around. So how do you start to segment the time that's available and think about it as a bigger budget pot than just the money budget? The time budget's an important one to think about as well.
Yeah, and when it comes into that prioritization, it's obviously from a strategy point of view, you'll be getting a lot of ideas as to what to do next year. And it's really taking a step back, the holistic view of those ideas. Who's it coming from? Can we validate it with our own data from the previous years? Can we validate it with market research, customer research, maybe some more internal research? And then, prioritizing those accordingly. If, data backs it up, research backs it up, those kind of things, they might give them more weight.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to that idea of prioritization and ruling ideas in and out of the plan, you definitely need to think about your first priority is looking for the big and best ideas that fit most closely with your strategy. Then your second priority is probably looking at those ideas that don't fit naturally into your strategy right now, but might ask you to reevaluate the overarching strategy and your overarching idea. So if there's a channel that everyone is talking about and you know that your ideal customer profile personas are in fact consuming content in that place, then maybe it's worth adjusting your strategy so that that tactic can come in. And those are the things that are in. And then maybe there's a final camp that you need to think about, which is what isn't guaranteed to work, but might be worth testing to see if it can become a bit of a superstar in the future. If you've got any bandwidth, if you've got any budget left, then having some ideas that are worth testing if time is available is a perfectly valid thing to do. And that way, later down the line, when you are justifying your choices and you're justifying your strategy, it will be so much easier for you to say, we really do love that channel. We love TikTok. It doesn't align perfectly with our strategy right now, but it's one of our testing ideas. So we will find a way to run some tests on TikTok this year, but we won't necessarily go all in on a campaign, for example.
Yeah, having that ideas bucket that you can draw on throughout the year, as and when you can.
Sometimes your ideas will fall through. You've got it all planned out that you're going to use your CEO as a thought leader and run an event series with him, and then he goes off sick. You're going to go to that ideas bucket and look at what else you can do with that time and that budget. That's a horrible example, but actually,
it's a good example though, actually.
You need your strategy needs to have some flexibility built into it. It's got some backup plans. And backup plans are really, really useful, especially when you've got stakeholders who are like, what about my idea? We're like, okay, it's not in the plan right now, but it's one of our first kind of backup plans. We think it's a great idea. It just doesn't fit with what we're trying to achieve overall at the moment.
Yeah, nice. I like that. The ideas pot.
Yes.
Cool. So how does one go about evaluating a marketing strategy like that they've already put together, perhaps, or that they're currently putting together? How do you really do that critical evaluation and analysis of your strategy?
I think it's a really good question. And for many people, especially if it's not your first rodeo, but even when it is the first time that you've worked on a marketing strategy for your company, I think it can be very easy to fall into a routine and the comfort of what you know well. So getting someone who's an external perspective can be really helpful. And this doesn't mean you have to take your whole marketing strategy and pay a consultant to look it over for you or anything like that. What we're talking about is use your network here. If there's someone that you studied marketing with that you really admire, maybe you just want to meet with them for coffee and talk through some of your biggest ideas and see what they think or hear what they're up to. That can be a really good way to get an external perspective on what you're doing. I'd say that, and also doing other things that you can to freshen your own head so that when you come back to review, you're not quite the same person you were when you wrote the thing. So as I said at the very beginning, I think this is a great time of year to get inspired and do some learning. So why not, watch some webinars or get out to an event, do something that takes you out of your comfort zone a little bit to help you develop so that when you come back and do your editing and get that final version ready to present, you're a bit fresher about it. It's one of those things where, even just finishing it one evening and picking it up a couple of days later after the weekend, for example, can
that's
fresh
like
perspective.
a lot of things, isn't it? Once you put it down and put it to bed, I've heard the phrase, and then wake up the next morning, feel a bit fresher. Just step away from it and see how you come with a new light the next day or the next week or whenever it might be. So what about when it comes into making those refinements and those changes, that process of editing the strategy you've already put together?
So I think that one really big mistake that marketers make is feeling like their marketing strategy is like something only they can work on. The best strategies actually are brought together out of the ideas of multiple people. And also your strategy, your plan is more likely to land well when you've already got people engaged with the ideas behind it. So rather than just saying, I'm going to go away into my lab and work on my marketing strategy for the next 2 months and I'll see you in December, book boardroom meeting, put some workshops in with the people who are going to sign off. Show them the early stages of your ideas, show them the data that you're using to validate your thought processes and get them to engage, workshop it with them, because that way they will already have had the chance to contribute, to, check anything that they're not sure about, and you will have had the opportunity to build feedback in to that big deck that you're probably ultimately going to present to the board at the end of this quarter.
Yeah. So are those workshops more of a kind of ideas forum where you're inviting stakeholders and stuff to bring new ideas, or are you presenting data findings from the rest of the year?
I think there can be a mixture, certainly. So if it's sales, they're probably going to want to look and understand what you see versus what they see. So collaborate, make sure that this is a great opportunity to really understand what they are seeing at their end and compare it to what you're seeing at your end. Use data for that conversation. If it's other stakeholders who might be thinking about things from a product perspective, let's say, or from the higher level direction of the organization perspective, then perhaps use it to show more of your work in progress and to talk through ideas. I'd never say if you're looking to shape from the beginning, you want to give people a framework to fit into. So you want to talk about the overarching, we're going to be doing this much content this year, and these are the channels we've got some ideas we'd like to pursue, and then talk about the ideas that fit into them, and give people a framework to work with, essentially, rather than giving them a blank sheet of paper, which can feel a lot more dangerous, I think.
Yeah. So okay, I think that makes sense. And in terms of where you should be looking for measurement and everything in the next year, what should marketers actually be looking at?
This is probably one where I'm starting to feel a bit like I'm flogging a dead horse on this one. I think every time I'm on this podcast, I talk about the fact that it's important to make sure that your marketing goals are aligned to your company goals, but that's never more true than it is at this point. It's really easy to take the company goal as just achieve X revenue in this time frame, but actually the questions that you need to be asking to make sure that your marketing strategies are aligned well is, how is that going to be broken down? What proportion of that is coming from sales to existing customers through account management? What proportion of that is net new that's coming through marketing? And also, what deal size are we talking about here? Is that changing? Is that staying the same? Because it will have such an impact on what will work and what won't. If ultimately your company is looking to increase deal size and also increase revenue, you are going to be working on how you position. You are going to be working on increasing the perceived value of what you do. And that's a very different proposition from we want to continue selling things exactly the way we've been selling them, but to more people, when you're actually going to be thinking about just increasing reach more of the same. Understanding the composition of those company goals, where they come from, and how you are to break them down is so important.
Yeah. So how do you make sure, this might be a really simple and obvious question, but I do want to ask it because I'm sure lots of marketers go through the struggle of setting a realistic goal that aligns to the company goal and the overarching objective. But how do you make sure that if that's absolutely ludicrous and ridiculous, how do you make sure marketing's goal is realistic and achievable and aligns to the budget and everything you've been given in terms of resource?
Well, in an ideal world, you're not just being given your budget. I know that sounds probably quite hard to a lot of marketers who are more or less handed their budget by finance without as much chance to make a case for what they need as possible. But really, a big part of the strategy process that you should be going through right now is to identify, once you've got those broken down goals, what it will actually cost to achieve them, rather than waiting to be told how how much money and how much resource you've got to work with it. It is for you to be saying, okay, if you need to do this, then it's a simple one, really. If you need to just increase the number of people who are seeing what you do to achieve your results because nothing about your offering is changing, then it's just going to be a multiplication game. We got this much with this much last year. We can do some refinement and continue to improve what we're putting out, but actually it's mostly about volume. Therefore, we're going to need X times the budget. If it's a case of we need to move up market and our brand isn't fit for purpose, they need to know the cost of a brand that will align and promote them in the space that they're looking to move into. So really, this is your opportunity to be positioned as their trusted advisor on marketing and to say, if this is what the company is looking to achieve, this is how much it's going to cost. Of course, that's not always possible, and there do need to be fallback plans. There are plenty of people who are working in situations where they're either getting exactly the same amount as last year or they're getting a bit less. When that's the case, then all you can do is refine what you're going after and how you're going after it down to as few different activities as possible so that you can maximize the effort in all of them. But even then, it's best if you can use this conversation, this process of doing your strategy, aligning it to budgeting and so on, to say, given the budget, we're going to have to do things this way, but based on our previous results, we think it's likely that we'll achieve more like X or Y.
Yeah. Just to throw a few kind of scenarios out there, because we all love a scenario in marketing.
Definitely.
What about those people that might have overachieved last year with a tiny budget and they're expected to overachieve again this year with maybe the same budget or just a fraction more? There's a lot of marketers out there that are creative and doing a fantastic job that I'm sure are just somehow doing amazing things with such a small budget, and then they're just expected to repeat that year on year with the same growth. Does it just come back to the point of using that data and that analysis?
I think some of it does, certainly. If you know how you got the success and you feel confident that you can recreate it, that's great. If looking at the market, you think things are changing, if you started to see things tail off towards the end of the year after having great first 2 quarters, let's say, then that's something to flag. You certainly wouldn't want to just keep doing the same thing if you've started to see leading indicators that say it won't continue to work. But firstly, congratulations to you if you are in that position of having had a fantastic year on a really shoestring budget and you're looking to do more with it. The thing I would always say to any marketer, if you've got stuff that's good, think about how you can reuse and repurpose. Actually you're working with more next year because you are creating something that's new and working with what you already had to get better results. a good amount of recycling there will actually mean that your second year of investment is more effective.
Yeah, that's a great shout. The repurposing. You're not really starting from a fresh eye. You've got that whole year in the bank to start using stuff. So what about the flip side where you've had an awful year? Results are absolutely down the drain. It's been rubbish, but you're asking for more budget for the next year in order to meet the targets, but it's a sticky situation, isn't it? Because you haven't achieved with the current budget, and yet you're asking for more budget when you haven't kind of proven that you can make it work.
I think that's probably one of the hardest positions to be in, and it's certainly not unheard of. I think ultimately, if you've really struggled for results, you've got to learn as much as you possibly can about why. And you've got to go in with a strong case for doing things differently and a strong case for what that costs. And it might be that in some of the ideas we were talking about previously, we were saying your company wants to move up market, but your brand doesn't work for that. That is something that the company needs to understand and accept, because even if, worst case scenario, you can't reach agreement and the budget is not good, no one's going to be able to get success with that budget, not you or anyone else. So ultimately, being candid about that, being constructive about that, and saying, to achieve the kind of results you're talking about, we will need these kinds of investments, and maybe abstract part of it from what you did previously. It's really about looking at what are we really looking at achieving, what did we learn from what didn't work, what do we need to do to meet those goals that we actually have now.
Yeah.
And that hopefully should be a conversation that you can separate from what we tried previously and the budget that was associated with it.
And I suppose a lot of the time, it's not just a marketing problem. I'm not saying, obviously, I'm going to try and defend marketers a bit here, being a marketer, but there are often a lot of factors that go into not achieving a marketing goal. Market factors that are uncontrollable, things happening in the world, issues with product market fit and repositioning and those kind of things. So, you have to take a broad view of these things and not just point a finger at marketing.
No, absolutely. That's why, going back to that point of your audit needs to be really thorough. You need to understand and learn from everything. If you had success, you really need to know why you had success. Otherwise, you could do what you think is the same and completely miss the point. If you had no success, you need to do everything you can to identify why it wasn't successful and identify what you can do as an alternative that will work better. It is such a tricky thing to do, to ask for more when you've got less before, but you do need to really do what you can to separate out the conversations at that point, I think.
Yeah, that was a hard question, but I think you perfectly summed it up. So thanks for that. In terms of the narrative you have to create around all of this then. So you've kind of audited last year, you've got your ideas in order, the prioritization, kind of know what you want to do, the strategy's there pretty much. How do you craft the narrative to actually get everyone on board on what you're going to try next year, what you're going to do?
Yeah, I think with this one, marketers are often digging deep and really and looking at results and data and so on. The narrative is something that can be forgotten. Any kind of data needs to have an explanation and either provide insight or contribute. But actually, I think a lot of people start by thinking about how to communicate what they found and not about setting the mission for what we're trying to achieve, which is, we all know what the goal is here. Therefore, the mission for marketing this year is a 1 to 2 sentence mission statement, which will be something like, this year, to achieve the goal of moving up market, we are going to improve our brand and reposition alongside these competitors instead of those competitors. Something that is quite pithy, that states where you're going to go overall, and that then all of the findings that you had along the way, all of the tactics that you've lined up, fits into that narrative. So that, if ultimately you only end up with 5 minutes to present, you can say, it's fine. I've only got to tell you 2 things. I've got, this one sentence to talk about, and I can show you where all of the work behind it is. But it's got to be something that's motivating for the business, that brings those stakeholders in, and ultimately that everything else, be it your updated keyword research, be it your content plan, everything that's drawn out of those in your deck is about hitting the highest impact notes. Last year, we noticed that this keyword we've been relying on for years no longer means to the market what it did when we started going after it. This year, we saw this huge drop because our audience have moved from LinkedIn to TikTok, whatever it is. All of those findings, all of those insights, all of those tactical choices along the way need to help you bolster and feed into that overarching mission statement, validate it, challenge it where it needs to be challenged, so that the most refined version of the plan is nuanced, because a 2-sentence statement is not going to be particularly nuanced. But ultimately, everything else that you show, talk about, have done behind it needs to back up that mission.
Yeah. And when you spoke about earlier, evaluating the marketing strategy through the editing process, workshopping with stakeholders, getting input from stakeholders and peers, that's all going to help the narrative, right? Because they already kind of know what's happening and probably expect the strategy to come anyway. It's not some sort of huge hard hitting item. It's like, boom, like 500 grand on this new wacky idea that nobody's ever heard of before. Everyone's kind of aware of what's going on anyway, what's working, what's not, what we're going to try next year.
Absolutely. You certainly don't want any of what you are about to tell them to be landing 100% cold. If you are saying we need a rebrand, you don't really want that kind of shock to the system of, by the way, we're going to spend £60,000 on a rebrand at the beginning of the year before we go on to do X, Y, and Z. You need to have signposted that as part of the journey. And that's why bringing those stakeholders in early is important. You want to make sure that you have energy and enthusiasm for this strategy, which can be particularly hard if you've worked at the same company for a number of years. And that's why you've gone out to the people that you know. That's why you've gone to those webinars and taken a step back from the day-to-day and done some learning to refresh yourself, so that you're coming in and you're bringing your full marketing passion to the table. And people remember why they hired you and why you've done such great work for them over the years. And you remind yourself that's important too. Confidence is key when it comes to presentations. But ultimately, that's why it's a journey. That's why you've not gone into the lab and come out 3 months later. It's why you've involved your stakeholders. It's why you've worked on it with workshops, and you've brought together the best of the ideas across the organization, across the market. You've looked at the budget. You've done what you can to recommend a budget that will achieve the goals that the company has, or identified ways that, some things can be scaled down, perhaps, if goals are reduced. But whatever you're presenting, you need to go in pretty chuffed with how it's come together, and you want to make sure that it's not coming out of the blue.
Yeah. And I love the point around, just be excited, be enthusiastic, confident about what you're presenting.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start to wrap things up here a bit. That's been absolutely brilliant. Any kind of final advice for marketers going through the 2024 planning and strategy phase right now? Words of wisdom to help them along their way?
If you do have a blank page right now, don't panic. You've got time. But probably the biggest and most important advice I'd always have for anyone putting together a marketing strategy is editing is 90% cutting out. It's very rarely adding more in. The more effort you can put behind each of your individual efforts, the better. So far better to be in a situation where you're only doing 3 big things this year than when you're trying to do 15 and you already know that's not really going to work.
Amazing. Cool. Right. Well, let's wrap things up there then. That's been absolutely fantastic. I know, anybody going through the strategy and planning phase right now can easily take some of those bits of advice, and hopefully it will help you on your journey and to success next year and growing those numbers. So let's wrap it up there, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. Of course, you can follow the Blend LinkedIn page for any future events, and you can watch or listen to any episodes on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of those channels. Just search for Demand Decoded. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.